everyone for joining this call today. I'm really excited to have Gale and Ralph join us today. I think they go with no introduction, and Fraser kind of gave the official one in terms of title. So I'm just pleased. Both Gale and Ralph have been through the ringer, many years of all the different things that have happened in the utility sector, and kind of seen it all. But there's always something new, and they've succeeded and lived to survive as CEOs and chairmen for many years now. So really glad to have both of you today. Thank you.
Good to be here.
Same here.
So I know this is probably one of the first panels where the words ESG were not in the title. And that's been a lot of what the market and investors talk about, and I'm sure you have in many meetings, but I'm sure your boards, that's not the only thing you talk about. And there are a lot of other kind of critical issues going on, and I think we've seen with some of the events this year that things other than just kind of the environment and carbon, other than that, also matter. And so maybe you could just talk a little bit about, to start, how grid security, energy security fits into the discussions you have at your board and at the management level. And is this something that the markets kind of maybe don't really appreciate relative to other things they've been very focused on?
Well, I can start off, and Ralph,
That'd be great.
you and I'll trade back and forth. We both had, as Steve said, lots of years of working through a lot of issues in the industry. I would say that essentially for companies like ours, Steve, even though ESG has been the phenomenon of the last several years, the bedrock responsibility of companies like ours is really energy security. We talk about reliability, and reliability is at the core of everything we do. And we talk about, as we look at our investment plans, as we take our investment plans to our boards of directors for approval, as we go to our regulators for approval, the essential element is energy security, but broadened in this ESG era to what I call three key imperatives: affordable, reliable, clean. So everything we do now is really through the lens of those three key imperatives. And I think, and we've all been through cycles, but I think what's happened is we've seen, because of the invasion of Russia into Ukraine, because of the serious policy issues in terms of energy in Europe, and because of some of the events we've seen more recently in the U.S., like Storm Uri, that took out the energy system in Texas. We've seen, because of events, a much more growing awareness of the need for energy security. And I think as we move toward decarbonizing the economy, the ability to continue to deliver affordable, reliable, and clean, with a big emphasis on all three, is really much more difficult because of the intermittent nature of the renewables, et cetera. But it's a great challenge. But as you know, and I'll turn it over to Ralph, but as you know, when history tells us that when intelligent people and capital resources and technology are harnessed together, incredible things can happen. I think we're just in the early innings of obviously a major transition in how energy is produced and delivered worldwide. Ralph?
Yeah, so I think Gale hit the nail on the head in his comments. Once upon a time, Steve, ESG really was nothing more than a repackaging of a sustainable business. And we both run companies that are over a century old, and we both aspire to leave them in a position to run for another century. But I think what's happened is what it takes to sustain a company has morphed over time. And to be sure, safe, reliable, and clean has always been at the core of these operations. Once upon a time, clean meant that rivers shouldn't catch fire. And then clean meant that people shouldn't have particles that they're breathing in through the air. And now clean means the stuff that used to carbonate your water can't be emitted into the atmosphere. And reliable used to mean you didn't want blinking lights. Now reliable means that after an event like Superstorm Sandy, which was 10 years ago today, 10 years ago this year in October, that power needs to be restored within 24, 48 hours. Unheard of definitions of reliability. And threats, it used to be vehicles accidentally hitting poles as opposed to nation states messing with cybersecurity. So at a high level, we've always worried about sustaining our companies. At a slightly lower level, it's always been about environment, social issues, governance. At an even lower level, it's been about affordability and cleanliness and reliability. But as you drill down deeper and deeper with time, those challenges and those issues take on different aspects and attributes.
Yeah. No, that's, it's funny because in some ways I feel like utilities have always been having to balance different interest and priorities. It's pretty much part of the job. So a lot of these things are not new to us, just kind of the change in emphasis maybe. But I'm maybe just to kind of hit a quick topic and initial reaction, the Russia-Ukraine war, like what changed at your companies after that's happened? What perspective change? What are you thinking differently than you maybe thought before?
If you don't mind, Gale, I'll start this one and hand it over to you. I think there are two things that came to mind for us. First of all, just the price impact on utility bills in Europe, having a ripple effect here in the United States. I mean, historically, natural gas was very much a locally priced commodity, and we've gotten used to oil being a globally priced commodity, but we're seeing natural gas take on more global attributes than perhaps it did in the past. We have also come to grips with the fact that we, for those of us who are worried about climate change and what it means to the climate provisions of the Build Back Better or other policy initiatives, we've taken this opportunity to remind people that if we really want to tackle climate change globally, we have to recognize that 600 coal plants are being proposed for construction in India and China. And those plants will operate for 3 or 4 decades, and that will have a significant impact on the carbon budget of the atmosphere. At the same time, our Eastern European allies, our Western European allies for that matter, but who are more in the eastern part of Europe, are under some significant threats as energy has been weaponized in the issue that you referred to, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So we ought to think seriously about becoming the reliable partner in global energy markets through LNG as a way to help minimize the dependence upon developing nations for coal, and as a way to support the geopolitical stability that we so value in Europe by helping wean countries like Poland, Hungary, and Germany from Russian gas. That doesn't mean that we can accept UK-like price escalation in natural gas here in the United States. What that will mean here is that we will need to continue to invest in carbon-free energy, whether that's the existing nuclear fleet, wind, solar, and make sure that we have some level of price stability for energy here in the U.S. as demand for natural gas for export increases. And hopefully we can have some regulatory relief that allows that production of natural gas for liquefaction and then export to happen in the most economic terms possible. It's a very long-winded way of saying we have two opportunities here that combine into one. One is geopolitical stability, and another is climate change by the U.S. becoming a major international player in energy markets.
Gale, any thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, Ralph has had some very interesting and appropriate thoughts. I would add two things to what Ralph has said, because I completely agree with Ralph's assessment. I think the first is actually the first thing that came to our minds as we sat around as a management team immediately after the Ukraine invasion and understanding what was happening to energy supplies and energy prices in Europe. It actually reminded me of a lesson of history in our industry. And that lesson of history over more than 100 years is that there is no perfect fuel source, and customers are best served by having a diverse fuel supply, a diverse mix of energy resources to serve customers. I can remember, and Steve may not be old enough, but Ralph and I are, to remember the bad old days of the 1970s when Jimmy Carter was president. And actually, Jimmy Carter signed an executive order out of the Oval Office that actually banned the use of natural gas for power generation.
Fuel Use Act. I remember it well. That's right.
Exactly. And again, the view was we were running short of natural gas, and the best use for natural gas was home and commercial heating. So there was literally a ban on the use of natural gas for power generation. Again, the lesson of history here, and Ralph has pointed to it, is that customers are best served, and energy security is best applied by having a diverse fuel mix. So that leads me to a couple of conclusions. I mean, first of all, I agree with Ralph's thought about for international security reasons, the U.S. can be the stabilizing force with LNG exports. It should be the stabilizing force with LNG exports. And it reminded me of one thing that, as Ralph talked about, the number of coal-fired power plants being built in other parts of the world, et cetera. Energy is produced and delivered more cleanly in the United States than anywhere else in the world. So we need to, for lots of reasons, we need to turn on the energy economy in the United States. Secondly, natural gas prices, because of the LNG impact, are probably not going back for a long time to where they were. And in many ways, that also could accelerate the development of renewables, because I think, Steve, you pointed this out in some of your research. Actually, EVs, renewable technologies, are even more cost competitive in a high fossil fuel price world. So just a few thoughts about energy security, and I think it starts with the lesson of history, reinforced by what we've seen over the years when there are major crises, that a diverse mix of fuels is really needed, both for economic and reliability purposes.
Yeah. No, those are great points. I think after the war started, we kind of said the new ESG is energy security guaranteed. Another way of kind of saying this, and I, just more specific to what you brought up, I kind of had two conclusions or thoughts afterward. The first was, can we really think of natural gas as a bridge fuel anymore? If we're really going to be using it to supply, the rest of the world with natural gas, how can we really view it as something that's going to be a bridge fuel? It's going to be much more long dated in terms of us needing to produce it. And that's got a lot of implications. For example, if we're going to keep growing natural gas production use, don't we need to actually build more pipelines and such? So that's one thing. I'd love to get your view on that maybe first.
And Ralph, I'll take it and then hand it to you.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Sure.
I mean, first of all, I think the answer is yes and yes. I was visiting the other day with the CEO of a company that has just applied. In fact, they just submitted an 80,000-page application for approval from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to build an LNG export facility off the state of Louisiana. And there's no question that additional export facilities, but you can't get the gas to export unless you have more pipeline capacity. So there has to be more pipeline capacity built. I don't think there's any question about that if we're going to achieve the potential that Ralph talked about the U.S. being a stabilizing force with energy. But I think the other thing here that is very clear to me is that we also have to look at natural gas. And I think for those of us, and I'll bet Ralph would say the same thing, for those of us deeply involved in the industry, this is not a new revelation about gas being a longer dated transition fuel. And we saw this coming. And I'll give you two examples of how we saw it coming. Last summer, which was not a particularly warm summer in the middle western part of the U.S., there were more red alert days from Midwest grid operator than we've seen in probably a decade. There were days when it was 74 degrees in Wisconsin, and we were being asked to run every generating unit we had to help keep the lights on to meet demand in the middle western part of the country. So as more and more coal-fired capacity has retired, as more and more renewables have entered the Midwest grid, there has to be that stable source of dispatchable power. And our modeling, MISO's modeling, I'll bet Ralph's modeling all shows that natural gas-fired combustion, natural gas-fired combined cycle plants are going to be asked to run harder and harder, and in the latter part of this decade, harder than they've ever run before. Ralph?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, Gale. Yeah, Steve, at the risk of sounding a little defensive, I do remember, as Gale pointed out, the Fuel Use Act. I remember Jimmy Carter in front of a fireplace in a chair with his cardigan sweater and his elbow patches talking about the need to conserve. And I remember waiting on lines on when my license plate was eligible because it was odd or even. I don't remember whether it was which one of the two it was. So energy security in the form of an all the above strategy makes perfect sense to me. But in the United States would be insane to forfeit the advantages it has with indigenous fuels. I've since undergraduate days, since waiting on those gas lines, I've been a believer. I first started out as a believer in fusion energy. Now I'm dedicated to offshore wind, fission energy, energy efficiency. But we need to do the R&D to capture the carbon from our natural gas and our coal facilities. We need to build the infrastructure, to get to your question, to energize our economy. I love that phrase that Gale used. I really think that's valuable. All too often, we use the excuse, well, what's the point of us tackling carbon and expanding the use, if we're going to expand the use of these fuels? Well, the reality is, the only reason why we reduced our carbon emissions in the United States is that we used more natural gas. And we emitted half a ton of CO2 for every megawatt hour instead of a ton of CO2 for every megawatt hour, which is more characteristic of coal. And as long as there are going to be countries, including ourselves, that want to use coal, we ought to invest in carbon capture and storage. So we ought to get these fuels out there to people in a way that minimizes the current plans that they have, India, China, and other nations, to emit carbon in the atmosphere. And if that means more pipelines here and more permitted LNG facilities, we should do that. And the notion that, well, why bother if China and India are going to consume the carbon budget that is available to us? China leads the world in wind construction. They lead the world in solar installations. They lead the world in electrification of transportation. They lead the world in mass transit development. I think they may lead the world in new nuclear, but I'm not 100% sure of that. I'd have to check my facts there. So they are building an economy for that leading energy technologies in the future, and we're just foolish to sit by idly and not make the investments that are necessary, both in LNG export, the pipelines to get the gas there, as well as the renewables and the nuclear power that we'll need to preserve our security back home.
No, that's right. And the other thing that hit me after Russia-Ukraine was obviously how important it is to keep nuclear in the mix. And we had that, obviously Germany kind of shut a lot of its nuclear, and you're seeing some of the impacts of that. So Ralph, I know that's been a topic near and dear to your focus, and maybe you could touch on that, but also more broadly, could we still get some kind of slimmed down EBB type bill with nuclear, with other things over the next coming weeks and months? What are your latest thoughts?
I think we can, and I think that Russia-Ukraine has enhanced the prospects for that for a variety of reasons. One is, to parrot what Gale said, you don't want to lose 20% of the nation's electricity supply, 50% of our carbon-free energy, and become strictly natural gas oriented or dominated by natural gas. So you learn a lesson from what's happening overseas, and you don't let yourself become overly reliant on a more limited set. Secondly, as you know, the congressional budgetary process involves an element referred to as scoring. If you want to pass legislation, you have to answer the question, what will it cost the taxpayer? And right now, the proposal, as it relates to nuclear, that's part of the climate provisions that are being discussed, is the only tax credit that is needs-based. And by that I mean it starts at power prices of $25 per megawatt hour and disappears when power prices go north of $44 a megawatt hour, I believe the numbers. And right now, in competitive power markets, prices are north of that $44. So the scoring of that tax provision is zero. It wouldn't cost the taxpayer. That then, of course, triggers the question, well, why do it? And the answer is because you want that insurance policy. I just shared a panel with John Chiani, and I loved the way he characterized it. Well, you have homeowners insurance even though your house isn't falling apart. You have health insurance even though you're healthy. So you'd want the nuclear insurance policy because these are capital-intensive assets that we pour tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars into every year to maintain them. So I think Ukraine has pointed out the importance of all the above. Nuclear is 20% of the nation's energy supply. Not all of those are in competitive power markets, but many are. And right now, we have an opportunity to put that foundation of support in for these long-lived assets that are an instrumental part of battling climate change, an instrumental part of secure baseload capacity. And in many locations, this is probably ancillary to this discussion, but in many locations are an important source of jobs and the economy.
And Steve and Ralph, to build on what Ralph is saying, beyond the potential for extension of tax credits or expansion of tax credits through Build Back Better or tax extenders bills later in the year, beyond that, there are going to need to be some significant decisions made in the very near future about the state regulated nuclear power facilities around the country that are reaching their current license expirations. So in many cases, I know Southern Company has several plants at the same vintage that we have. In many cases, we're seeing regulated nuclear units that are carbon-free, producing electricity reliably for customers reaching age 60. In the case here in Wisconsin, we'll have the first of the 2 Point Beach units turn age 60 in 2030 and the second unit in 2033. Decisions have to be made fairly soon on whether or not to seek license extensions and to invest the capital that would be needed to extend the lives of those units for another 20 years. I personally don't see that we can achieve any type of energy security and continue to decarbonize without massive extensions of these plants. That will require capital, that will require regulatory support as well. But I think it's an important element of where we need to go as we continue. We're still in the early innings, as you know, of decarbonization, and the mandate for energy security couldn't be larger. But to frame all of this, I saw a statistic the other day that just shows you how much progress we have already made. If you look at the global economies, and you look at the carbon intensity of the global economies in 1990 and compare that to 2021, we've actually increased economic output while decreasing the carbon intensity of the economies of the world by 50% since 1990. And we've done that pretty affordably. So I think again, we're in the early innings. And I would just reiterate, when technology and people and capital are harnessed together, sometimes, really significant things can happen. But it's going to require, again, going back to probably beating a drum, Steve, but it's going to require an all of the above strategy, including, I think, extension of existing nuclear and, very importantly, carbon capture.
Right. Yeah. No. And I'm sure there may be some questions on this topic and the like, but I'm going to switch gears to something different. So, one of the other things that certainly was a focus after the war happened and started was more talk of risk of cyber attacks and cybersecurity and the like. And I know this has been a very important focus of the industry that probably doesn't get much attention because, frankly, it's not something you want to be talking about all the time. But I'm sure you and your boards are managing this very carefully. So could you talk a little bit about how you manage the cyber threat and what kind of how maybe give some view to investors of kind of how to think about the risk of that and investment needs for that, or anything around that issue.
Well, and Ralph will be able to give you some chapter and verse as well. I would just say to start, and one of the things we've talked in detail with our board about, obviously it's a huge concern. We show them our top 5 risks every board meeting, and cybersecurity is clearly near the top of the top 5. But one of the things that I have been really pleased about, and it'd be interesting to see Ralph's view on this as well, is the phenomenal coordination between Homeland Security, the FBI, other federal agencies, and our industry. I think one of the things that normally there's a lot of bureaucratic red tape. There are a lot of things that get tied up and don't move very quickly when you're involved with the federal government. But I have been very pleased to see the information flow, the coordination. We were, Ralph, one of the first industries to be deemed a critical infrastructure industry, and the information flow, basically the alerts, the follow-up. I think it gives me a great deal of comfort that we're not acting alone here, and it's a very effective coordinated effort among the players in the industry and the coordinating council that's been set up that I think is pretty darn effective to help us prevent the worst of cybersecurity attacks. Ralph?
Yeah, no, I think this is a classic case of on this hand, but on the other hand. And I'm going to blame COVID. I haven't had the pleasure of seeing Gale in a long time, but it's amazing how much commonality we have in our points of view. I completely agree with Gale about Homeland Security and the cooperation with the federal government. I would extend that to this has also been an area of phenomenal cooperation among our own industry. And Edison Electric Institute is literally coordinating an effort right now where we're creating ad hoc panels to go in and assess the cyber security status of different companies as a way to both help the company being assessed as well as bringing people from other companies in to learn from what that company's doing. And we all do a whole standard set of things that how good are our employees at recognizing phishing attacks, and if they fail the phishing attack, the fake phishing attack, we have a conversation with them. If they fail it twice, maybe we slap them on the wrist, and so on up the escalation ladder. And we all bring in experts to attack our systems every year, and despite all of the patches and all the protections we put up, I'll speak for my company, we're diligent about it, and the attackers find a way in. We have separated our Chief Information Security Officer from our Chief Information Technology Officer, sort of akin to the audit function, not necessarily being best placed reporting to the controller of a company, right, for similar reasons. So I think we've done a tremendous amount of work to protect ourselves. Having said that, we're not able to defend ourselves from a nation state. It's just there's no Fortune 200 company, of which both WEC and PSEG are, that can do that. We need the kind of help that we get from the federal government. We need the kind of help we get from other agencies. And it makes me real uncomfortable to talk about this, because I don't want anybody to think that we're real good at it and put a bullseye on our backs in this regard. So I'll stop there, because I feel that red and white circle getting painted.
Ralph is right. Nobody's good at it. I mean, there's no way that any intelligent human being working in this industry can rest on his or her laurels. No one's good at it, because the attackers continue to improve and continue to get more aggressive. I will say this: one of the things that has encouraged me is that I think conceptually we've gone from, oh my God, we got to do everything we can to stop them from infiltrating, and we still do. But our thinking has evolved beyond that to, okay, if they get into our systems, how do we minimize the time in our system, and how do we minimize the fallout damage? And I will say to you, we had and I won't get into the details because I guess we'd have to kill everybody, but
yeah,
we survived a pretty serious attack last summer. And I was so proud of our IT security folks, and what the plan they had put in place worked.
Wow.
And the other thing I learned is that to control operation and maintenance costs, they said they were not going to pay ransom for me. So I don't know. But it is serious stuff. And by the way, Ralph, I don't know if you just got, but I see on my iPhone we just got an email, both of us, from Steve saying he's upgraded our stocks. I don't think
that's probably a cyber thing. I don't know. Well, no, that's look, at the risk of myself, maybe we'll kind of hold off on that topic. But if folks have questions on that, we'll take those. So just, one of the nice things about being a regulated utility is that, theoretically, some of these things to manage security, manage resiliency, also are really kind of investment opportunities to grow the business. So maybe you could talk to how you're thinking about, kind of investment opportunities related to, resiliency.
I'll start on that. Our thesis really hasn't changed for quite some time. Look, New Jersey was one of the original 13 colonies, right? So we don't have a lot of space where people are building new facilities and folks are storming the castles from other states. But what that means is we have 100-year-old gas pipes and 100-year-old transmission towers. So notwithstanding the lack of growth in demand for our product, there's no question that there's been tremendous growth in reliance on our product, right? None of us can live without these gadgets. That's supposed to be a phone. There it is. And pretty soon, none of us can live without our vehicles being charged. And my wife tells me I have to stop using a mechanical toothbrush because the electronic one is better for my teeth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So aging infrastructure replacement is a huge part of our resiliency. Less so from the point of view of physical security and more from the point of view of extreme weather events. But what goes hand in hand with that is the most rapidly growing part of our investment opportunities, albeit a distant second to the aging infrastructure in overall dollars, is consistency with public policy to decarbonize the economy. Whether that's energy efficiency or electric vehicles or advanced metering infrastructure, that is growing at the high double-digit rate. There's still a 1 in front of it, but it's close to having a 2 in front of it. But it takes a lot of light bulbs and programmable thermostats to equal a transmission tower. So it's still not as many dollars as that first. But yeah, those are the opportunities from a security point of view, whether it's security from a Superstorm Sandy or security from a 1.5 degree temperature rise, or just security from old stuff falling apart.
Very much echoing. I would say, well, our 5-year capital plan, 2022 through 2026, is $17.7 billion. And it's really dedicated in many ways to what Ralph is talking about, but 4 key themes. The first is that in that 5-year period, we plan to more than double the amount of carbon-free generation. So a very, very significant investment opportunity, and doubling the amount of carbon-free generation. We have one of the most aggressive CO2 reduction goals in the industry. Our goal, and we have an operating plan to get there, our goal is to reduce carbon emissions by 80% below 2005 levels by the end of 2030. So this is a big step forward toward achieving that goal. The second is, and it goes back to the conversation we were having about natural gas. Part of the plan is modernizing our gas-fueled generation fleet. We're going to be retiring some older gas units. We're going to be investing in and bringing online more efficient gas generation. So again, that's a step in the right direction, both in terms of reliability, resiliency, energy security, and decarbonization. And then to Ralph's point, I mean, we are, as you know, Steve and Ralph, we operate the gas distribution company, People's Gas in Chicago. And there, the gas infrastructure, some of it put underground under Chicago in the 1880s. The gas distribution infrastructure simply has to continue to be upgraded. There's just no choice. And by the way, across our system in the upper part of the Middle West, and I think you might find this interesting. We are adding the equivalent of a single natural gas distribution customer to our networks every hour.
Wow.
Some of them are coming from the industrial sector, where they've had their own generation, for example, using coal or oil, and or for their own environmental goals. They are now closing down that generation and switching to our natural gas delivery network. So again, it's all part of this long-run theme about decarbonizing and natural gas being an important player in that entire effort. And then the last piece is obviously expansion of the transmission system. We're going to continue to need expanded transmission capability to accommodate the renewable generation. So those are our four investment themes. But and Ralph, I'll bet you feel the same way. When I look back even 10 years ago, the specter of investment opportunities and investment needs to meet our mandates, that specter is so much greater today than it was even a decade ago.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah. And I guess that then leads to, and I want to, folks, I'm going to go to questions after this last one from me. So, Gale, I think you started talking about the clean, reliable, and then the last one was affordable. And
yep, the ARC.
We haven't really talked about the affordable part yet, and just there's nothing you can do about commodity prices. They just are what they are, and the like. So, just how are you both thinking about the affordability aspect right now? And we're in an inflationary world; everything's going up. Is it just people just going to have to realize that your utility bills are just one of the other many things that are going up because of this world we're in, or do you feel like you're going to need to do, we're going to see some kind of change in the regulatory environment if this continues?
Well, it's a great question, Stephen, and I would answer that two ways. The first being, many of the investments that I mentioned in our 5-year plan are actually going to lower customer bills compared to the status quo. So, for example, if we can retire, which we have in our plan, we can retire 4 older coal-fired power plants at our Oak Creek site south of Milwaukee. We will save $35 million of operation and maintenance costs from the retirement of those plants. That's just the O&M. Then we will actually not incur fuel costs to fuel that plant. And the replacement will likely be some form of solar capacity for the summer months that can help meet summer demand. So actually, many of the investments that we've already gotten approval for from the regulator and are seeking approval for actually help the equation in terms of delivering longer run, lower costs. In the interim, the other thing that we will continue to try to do is continue to drive best practices and efficiency. We have 7 customer-facing utilities, and we continue to drive efficiency and best practice throughout the enterprise. In fact, since our acquisition of Integris, which was, it's coming up on 7 years now. Since that acquisition, Steve, we've actually pulled $300 million of annual operating costs out of the system, simply by continuing to focus on efficiency and best practices. So we're doing everything we can to help the A part of the ARC, the affordable, reliable.
Yeah, this is an area of concern, Steve, for sure. Sadly, I don't think we can blink away the commodity price increase, in particular in our gas business, notwithstanding the fact that it's a pass-through. Customers can only afford to pay what they can afford to pay. We're pretty fortunate in New Jersey. We typically rank 2nd or 3rd in the nation in per capita income. That doesn't mean that you want to be inefficient or you don't want to pay attention to prices. I didn't mean to suggest that at all. Our average customer, I think, spends about 2% of their disposable income on their utility bill. Our low-income customers, believe it or not, spend less than that, about 1.5% because of the assistance programs. Having said that, I do think that commodity price escalation is going to put pressure on us. The way we tend to mitigate that is obviously similar to what Gale said, a relentless effort to minimize costs and pursue efficient operations. But the other thing that I think is key for us, and it was actually a source of pride for me early in my tenure, we received the Edison Electric Institute Award for being the company that does a great job of aligning the interests of shareholders with the interests of society. And what I mean by that is that basically, as Gale said correctly a few minutes ago, nowadays our range of investment opportunities is far broader than it was years ago. So what we do is we partner with our regulators and we say, okay, look, we've got 100-year-old gas pipe. We've got 100-year-old transmission towers. Methane is a 30x contributor to greenhouse gas effect compared to carbon dioxide. Transmission towers go down and you lose tens of thousands of customers. But you want to do offshore wind. You want to do rooftop solar. You want to do A, B, C, and D. Here's the impact on the customer. Here's the benefits of the environment. Help us. Let us help you meet your policy objectives. And that's where we direct our investment attention. Again, I'm not going to mislead you. If it was purely my choice, we would de-emphasize some things that the policymakers emphasize, and we would put our money in other places. But they fight battles to get into office, and then they appoint people to regulate us. So we work with them to pursue their policy objectives.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. Well, folks.
Steve, could I?
Please, Gale.
There's a great chart that I saw just the other day, and Ralph alluded to share of wallet, if you will.
Yeah.
Looking at disposable income of your customer base, and then the percent of that income that has to be spent on energy services, particularly utilities. And I'm really pleased to say that both for New Jersey and for Wisconsin, our share of wallet, if you will, is among the very lowest in the country. That helps. I mean, that helps a lot. But the truth of the matter is, the high commodity prices put a strain on everyone. But it does help when you're coming from a base of strength, where the energy burden in terms of the customer's wallet is quite low. Again, both in Wisconsin and New Jersey.
No, that's for sure. Well, folks, I want to make sure we give some time to take your questions. So if you have a question, please type it up in the question box, and wait here for about 20, 30 seconds and take your questions.
So that was a phishing email we got from you, Steve?
I don't think so, but well, I think we've got a shy audience today, but I've saved one question, or just really a thought for both of you. Is I'm curious. I kind of feel like you've both been CEOs for a long time. I've been an analyst for a long time, and when I see friends or other people and mention utilities or renewables or things like that, they actually care a lot more than they ever did about what I do and what I'm doing, and whether it's electric vehicles or renewables, things like that. It just seems like it's more interesting to people. My family actually seems to care. I'm curious how you're thinking about that. Or do you feel like the relevance of the industry, your companies, is just kind of hitting a new high level, given all the changes that are occurring?
Ralph, you first.
Yeah, sure. I think the answer to that is yes, right? I mean, we've always been an essential part of people's lives. We tended to get noticed in the past on two occasions, and neither of those were pleasant occasions, right? It's when the bill was too high, or when the power wasn't there.
Yeah.
But now, at the risk of some immodesty, now I get calls from members of Congress who are saying, well, what do you think about this provision because it's so important to climate change? Or what do you think about this provision because it's so important to energy security? And you're right, Steve. We do have interesting conversations, even at virtual cocktail parties, about what's going to happen in Ukraine and what will happen to Germany if they don't get natural gas. But I was on a panel earlier today where I started talking about hydrogen and exothermic reactions, and 3 people left the room. I think we have to be careful about how technical we get.
Yeah.
And but yes, our relevancy in the ESG role, which is I know you started that we weren't going to use those letters, I think has become increasingly significant.
Yeah.
Steve, we are increasingly, as an industry, we're increasingly at the pivot point of public policy driving decarbonization and technology. And I think those two factors have become, so much in the public conversation that clearly we are, I think, much more, if you will, relevant in the minds of investors and customers today and policymakers. I will say this, just as a bit of an aside, I've always felt that companies like ours were really the model ESG companies. I go back to 30 years ago, or actually more than 30 years ago since I joined the industry. But at the company I used to work for, one of the first presidents of that company coined the phrase "a citizen wherever we serve." So our companies have really been involved in the fabric of society, in proper governance, in technology developments, and in energy security and decarbonization for a long time. And I really think the future here, in terms of particularly investment interest, is really in, as we talked about, the incredible specter of investment opportunity that we have in infrastructure going forward, and then secondly, the positive impact that can have. I mean, we're at a point where reliability has always been important in this industry, but the impact that reliability and energy security can have and is having, both on the quality of life and on economic viability, continues to grow, and it will continue to grow. So I think companies like ours, run well with great investment opportunity, will continue to attract greater attention for what it's worth.
No, that's I think you're right with that. So you guys thought you were off the hook, but we got a good question asked here. So the question is, gentlemen, great panel. Which parts of your business would you say are most at risk of becoming so-called stranded assets? What steps are you taking to mitigate the risk to them and to your business?
Ralph, you first.
Yeah, sure. So we are in the process of advanced metering installation, and we're doing that over the next 4 years. We have worked out with our regulators that the replacement of the dumb mechanical meters, despite the fact that many of them have many years to go, should be a stranded asset that we're allowed to recover. No board can bind future boards. No regulatory commission can bind future regulatory commissions. So that would be a risk for us. I don't think it's a high probability event. Typically, regulatory boards don't like to overturn future regulatory board. Regulatory boards don't like to overturn past regulatory board decisions, even though they can't be bound from. But that would be one area, because we're replacing assets that have a multi-year life before the end of their life. The questioner probably expected me to say something about our gas distribution system, but I don't worry about that at all. The cost of converting a home about over 90% of New Jersey heats or cooks with natural gas, and the cost of converting one of those homes is over $10,000 per home. That's exclusive of the enhanced electric service that you'd have to pay for into the household to make up for the gas. And quite candidly, as we replace our aging gas infrastructure, we're sleeving it in a way that anticipates the use of advanced fuels, most likely in the form of hydrogen, so as to be able to continue to rely upon natural gas for heating and cooking, even as we hope to electrify with more heat pumps and electric vehicles and things of that nature. Notwithstanding the concern that some people have over distributed generation, I never worry about stranded asset costs in our electric grid. I just think that electric supply is a capital-intensive technology, whether it's distributed or central station, and the best way to make economic use of a capital-intensive asset is by connecting it to other users, which will make our grid even more valuable. So I don't think I have my head in the sand. Again, our number one worry would have been meters, but we took care of that in our replacement filing, and we talk regularly with our regulators about our gas investments, and they bless them with enthusiasm because of the way in which we're making those investments.
Ralph, making a great point. In terms of, and we have a significant amount of investment in natural gas distribution companies in the upper Midwest, where, by the way, during the polar vortex event a year ago, February, it got to minus 42 before the wind chill in northern Wisconsin. But we do not have a concern about the long-term value of our gas distribution networks, in part because, and I think this is a very important point, I think to properly evaluate something like the future of the gas distribution networks, you have to separate the value of the asset from the fuel source it carries. And we know, for example, that if hydrogen lived up to its potential 20, 30, 40 years from now, we know that our natural gas distribution networks could carry hydrogen. So actually, the natural gas distribution system, which I think is almost irreplaceable. I mean, think about, are you going to dig up the US and put in thousands and thousands and thousands of miles of new distribution pipes? I don't think so. But actually, our gas distribution networks could become the backbone of a hydrogen-fueled economy 20, 30, 40 years from now. For us, probably the biggest stranded investment, I wouldn't even call it a big risk, is the retirement that we have still coming of several of our older coal-fired power plants, where we will not have recovered the entire book balance at the time of retirement. Mm-hmm. But the way we've worked with our regulators who understand the transition, we will either securitize or remain in rate base for future recovery those unrecovered book balances, which are not now anymore a big percentage of our asset base. So like Ralph, I don't think we have our head in the sand, but I think we have a very good grasp on what is, I think, a very low risk proposition going forward.